I timed myself. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. This is a story, right? Content warning, it gets political, but we're artists here, right? Around artists, so things get political. So this is a story about war, land dispossession, the energy of trauma that infiltrates the DNA, and flowers. In 2013, my father lay in a hospital bed. I placed a vase of large sunflowers at his windowsill. Each day, the flowers turned their faces toward the sun outside the room. As we got closer to bringing him home to live out his final days, I noticed the flowers lowering as the sun retreated, turning back toward the hospital bed where my father mostly slept. The story begins generations before my conception, before 1969, before Vietnam. It belongs to a community that has lived through border race wars, Revolutionary War, Imperial War, and erased wars. The Battle of Medina remains part of that story, where Tejano and indigenous people fought against the Spanish rule and later lost land access through Anglo ownership, deeds, counties, and borders that severed families and communities from their relationships to land and each other. That violence continued throughout the Mexican-American War and intensified through the Indian removal campaigns and military occupation. Around Las Moras Creek, the establishment of Fort Clark in 1852 brought restrictions and violence into the lives of indigenous communities, including Lipan Apache. Families, bands, and clans were increasingly pushed away from Las Moras Creek and Bracketville toward Pinto Creek, Del Rio, and into northern Mexico. That fear intensified in 1873 when the Mackenzie raid into Mexico crossed into Coahuila and attacked indigenous villages at El Remolino, killing and kidnapping people, burning camps, destroying food supplies, and seizing horses to stop indigenous communities from living. Even movement into Mexico did not place communities beyond the reach of unsanctioned U.S. military violence. This is my father's lineage, his Tejano and Cuelcajen Inde bloodlines. His own mother was born only 51 years after the Mackenzie raid in Mexico, close enough for stories, memories of displacement, fear, and forced movement to be told across family and community, providing warning. By the time the Vietnam reached him, war was already familiar terrain. Young men from communities like this one enlisted or were drafted and sent to fight under the language of duty, patriotism, and stopping communism. When the My Lai massacre became public, anger spread across the United States as people confronted the violence, chemical warfare, and the absence of clear purpose for U.S. involvement in the war. Sound familiar? I was conceived within this energy. My father having just returned from Vietnam in 1969. In Vietnam, he drove ammunition and supplies to the front lines under constant threat from ambushes and landmines. He returned to a country in conflict with itself and eventually came to understand his role in a deeply controversial war. Over generations, terror and war existed beyond the battlefield. Wars entered families, nervous systems, and ways of surviving. My father lived with bouts of agoraphobia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and schizoid personality disorder, which all manifested by sustained exposure to fear, violence, isolation, and the constant anticipation of death. And I lived alongside those conditions with him for the rest of his life. He was strong, even though chronic pain committed to caring for us and holding on to joy the best he could. Living through mental health struggles and chronic pain meant searching for steadiness. And for my father, that steadiness was found through land, through routine, and through care. No matter how much we struggled at times with poverty, he always owned his home, and he always owned land. He lived out his days tending to the land, caring for his 20 pecan trees and myriad flowers. He also devoted much of his time to helping veterans and widows from the Vietnam War, Gulf War, Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan figure out the VA systems and how to secure benefits that were and continue to be incredibly difficult to access. My father and his fellow American Legion family would greet and honor returning soldiers, whether alive or not. For the fallen, they stood honor guard beside coffins draped in American flags, folding the flags into sharp triangles before placing them into the hands of widows, children, and next of kin. They played taps and walked veterans through their final return home. And because my father was a musician, he would sit at the gravesides and serenade the fallen and their families. I often wonder what parts of these soldiers my father recognized in himself. He returned from the Vietnam War greeted with protest and hate, eventually coming to understand the violence, political interests, and devastating human costs tied to U.S. involvement in wars abroad. Yet even with that understanding, he couldn't abandon the soldiers or their families. Perhaps he understood that most of them entered war young, carrying duty, survival, poverty, patriotism, or family tradition, without fully understanding the violence they had been sent into. Whatever my father held in his heart, he believed the dead deserved dignity and the living deserved care. When the years of war, chronic illness, chemical exposure, and cancer finally overtook my father's body, my own body collapsed, and with it, it seemed, my mind. I ended up in the hospital, surviving meningitis after my immune system gave out. I'm still not fully out of the woods, physically or mentally. What followed were years of struggling with Western medicine, searching for wellness, coming back to the land, to indigenous practices, to ceremony, and to community has been my saving grace. I found that grace within the light that radiates from the sun. On the morning my father passed, the sunflowers we brought home from the hospital sat at the windowsill next to his bed, their faces turned toward the morning light, my father gazing upward with them. My mother asked, "¿Qué miras, amor?" What do you see? In his quiet and raspy voice, he whispered, "Pues, ahí está Dios." A few hours later, he exhaled his final breath. He exhaled his final breath in this physical realm. And then a final poem, Fleshed. Searching for a way back into my body, I pray the drum psalm of joy. I galaxy across an unmarked strip of light where my body becomes song. My first love song ascends alongside Father Go. Si Anze climbs the sky, touches Tanda Escos. The waning moon cradles me within the lull of my cry. Thank you.